Hi there, and welcome to episode 60 of B2B SaaS Marketing Snacks. I'm Brian Graff, I'm the CEO of Kalungi, and today I'm here with Kalungi's co-founder, Stein Hendricks, who's a serial SaaS marketing executive and ex-Microsoft product marketing leader. Today, we're talking about how to hire the right marketing leader. This can be a really daunting and also tricky decision to make as a founder or a leader of a B2B SaaS company, and the cost of making the wrong decision can be quite high, with lost budget, equity, and often most importantly, time. In this episode, we'll give you an overview of some of the factors to consider when you're going about your hiring process, including the level of experience, the industry expertise of the candidate, and the culture fit, and what to look for in each area to make the best decision. We'll also discuss how to define success for the role so that you can set the right expectations with your new marketing leader and maximize the value they can drive for your organization. Let's get into it. Okay, so here we are again, Stein, and we have a new topic today that I think is interesting, and we've touched on it a few different times with different angles, but I wanted to come back to it because I think it's really useful for our audience and just something that doesn't get talked about all that much. And that is really how to hire a marketing lead or a leader within your team. That's fairly talked about, but also how do you get hired, right? If you're a marketer or a marketing lead or even a fractional executive, right? How do you make yourself stand out from the other wave of fractional executives that is coming up and all of the solid resumes and solid LinkedIn profiles that are out there, right? How do you make sure you are the one that stands out and gets that dream job? So, in this episode, we've already talked about this from the hiring perspective in, I think, episode 13 of this podcast. And you, Stein, gave some great points on kind of the leadership, management, and ROI piece of things. But maybe we can just start with, as you're thinking about hiring a marketing leader, say, in a company, what are the things that you look for? What are the qualities that you look for? Resume pieces, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, when I am asked to help a CEO or a founder find their next marketing leader, it is the first thing I always want to make sure I understand is where's the company on the journey of kind of strategy versus tactical needs from their marketing leader. We have another article about this that we'll post here in the notes that is really a framework on when you get to MVP. It's a very different part of the journey than when you have to get to product market fit. Getting to MVP is a very strategic phase where there's so many unknowns, where you're testing kind of a concept of a pain that you think exists, that you think you can build a solution for. It's very strategic. And it's very important that the founder usually is kind of the marketing leader themselves, right? Or they have someone who's very close to them, who's helping them on that part of the journey. Where when you have that established, and you have maybe a couple of clients that you're working with in the kind of MVP state, right? Who are testing and helping you build the product and giving you feedback, but they're not necessarily paying you yet. To go from that to go to product market fit is usually getting a little more skill, right? How do we get 100 clients to use this or 10 people who pay this? And that's much more tactical. Now you have to kind of go recruit a bunch of people, maybe knock on some doors, have a program, maybe a beta program. So the marketing leader that you need then is maybe less of a strategic CMO who's going to question maybe the positioning, question even the raison d'etre of the company. It's much more, hey, I'm going to just recruit 10 people to use this, right? But then when you get out of product market fit, then you get to the T2D3 part of the growth phase where you have to now diversify our demand gen and focus on customer retention and figure out how to grow ARPU. It's a much more strategic effort again, right? So now you have to have someone who understands positioning and packaging and pricing and kind of the 5-6 P's of marketing, the distribution strategy, right? The more the traditional P's are about plays and promotion. And of course, in the new world, that means do you go to market through a channel or not? Or do you go direct? Do you stick with a very tight ICP or do you broaden it a little bit? At what point do you go global instead of staying in one country, right? These are super strategic questions that you actually get to when you're getting out of product market fit and now you want to go. You have to 10x your growth, but without being able to just do what you have done so far, right? So that's my first big question to solve for, Brian. Do I need a CMO? Do I need a marketing leader who's going to fit one of those three kind of stages of the growth journey? And then the second is, are you ready to hire someone in-house because you're willing maybe to invest the time it takes to get an in-house candidate not only hired, but onboarded. It can easily be a year. It's at least half a year to both hire a full-time marketing leader and then also allow them to be onboarded and then kind of build their own team. It just takes a little longer. But if you're ready to do that, if you have the 2, 3, 4 years of kind of runway in your cash because you're either funded or you're profitable, then you need to at some point have that internal, full-time marketing leader. So maybe you're ready to do that. Or are you still, I don't know exactly where we'll be a year from now. I have limited clarity on how my cash flow situation will be 4 or 5 months from now. I need a quick hitter. I need someone who can so then you're kind of looking more for a contractor. It could be a fractional CMO. We've talked about that in another podcast. How do you kind of make that trade-off? But if you're now hiring your first marketing leader, you would still look for a contractor instead of a full-time long-term hire. That's the second question I would like to get answered. And then the third one, and this is I think the most interesting one for this episode of our podcast, marketing is usually a mix of art and science, right? And when you hire your CMO, the best CMO, I think, complements the founder or the founders on either the science or the art side. So sometimes you have founders who have a very natural ability to be the numerical, very analytical, very good at kind of planning and turning strategy into execution. In that case, getting a CMO who's maybe a little more creative, who really gets the art part of building a brand and building an audience and building connections with audiences and the communication side of that art. So that might be a great profile. But if you have a founder who's much more the creative side, who's loves to start things, but maybe is not a great finisher, who's very good at the ideation part of creation and the creativity, but maybe less on how to turn that into something concrete and build the team around that and have them kind of turn the big ideas into great execution, then you want a CMO who's good at that, right? Who's good at making the trains run on time and being very data focused, very much the science side of marketing. So those kind of would be 3 things that I would like to get answers to, Brian, before I come up with, okay, this is the profile of the CMO we're looking for, and then we'll talk more in this podcast on kind of how do you then go about the more technical implementation of that search. But yeah, that's where I would start, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's in the article that you're referencing, we have this chart where it has, strategy by strategy on the y-axis and maturity on the x-axis of the company. And it is interesting to see that you really need a high strategy in the beginning. And then as you start to get traction, jumps down into tactics and then it jumps back up. What's interesting, especially for early stage, is that you kind of need almost since you don't have that much budget, right, to hire a full team around an executive, it's almost better to get a jack of all trades marketer who is strategic, but can also jump in and just get their hands dirty and get things done, right? Because when you're early stage, right, your job is to test the market hypothesis and go get customers where, you don't know what the go-to-market strategy is, right? You need to go build one. It's a very different skill set than that more mature phase that you were referencing, where that person needs to be a pure strategist, needs to be able to run a team of 15, 20, 30, 50 people, right? Very different skill set. And so it's really good to know where you sit in that continuum and start to tune your search appropriately. What do you think about, say that we've gone through and we've answered all those questions. What do you think about experience when you're looking at candidates? There's tons of candidates out there, some with 30 years experience, tons of gray hairs, as we like to say, right? And others that are more fresh, right? And maybe a little bit more risky. What do you think about when you're looking through resumes and find those different scenarios?
Yeah, experience can be, it's something, of course, that you need to go faster. You need someone who's done many of the things you need to do before. Experience can also hold you back if it's, something that maybe is not the right type of experience for where you are in your growth journey. Let's first talk about where it really helps you. There's so many mistakes that you can, or traps that you can fall into by either entering the wrong market or hiring the wrong agency or implementing the wrong tools, right? The wrong CRM system or the wrong type of website infrastructure. Hiring the wrong team, right? There's probably nothing more costly than that. So all those things will usually benefit from someone who's done those things before, right? That I think is the upside of having someone who's really experienced. And then, of course, you have to make sure that you're looking for the right experience. It's not necessarily the amount of years having been a marketing leader or the large team that someone has led or the large amount of revenue that they have generated, but that they do something that resembles the next stage of growth that your company is going through. Right? If you just went from 1 to 6 million ARR, maybe in the first couple of years, now you have to go to 10 or 11. Can you find someone who's done that? And maybe the stage that comes after that as well, right? Because you want to give someone something also that's interesting for them. It's not just the same as what they've done before. But yeah, hiring someone who's only worked in a 300 million ARR environment, although they have a ton of experience, it might not be the right fit for what you need if you need to go from 6 to 10. So that's, I think, where experience also can become a sea anchor a little bit, right? If you have someone who's gotten used to doing things in a certain way, is not necessarily open to meeting your team where you are, where your company is, having the flexibility, the agility to fit the specific challenges that you're facing. Curiosity is a more general, I think, attribute tenet, I guess, for a great candidate, because every early stage company is going to be different, right? Even if you're in a certain revenue band, if you're in a certain market, the amount of people on your team is still small, so having a certain type of people on your team could make the leader you need very different from having a different type of people. But yeah, I think experience to be valuable has to be appropriate for what you need, but nothing can beat the experience impact of not hiring the wrong team, not going into the wrong market, not building the right or implementing the right tools, etc., because those can be very costly mistakes.
I think having the experience of a Fortune 500 company, right, looks great on a resume, but definitely may not apply to your pre-revenue or 10 million, 20 million, 50 million even startup, right? The variables that they were working within, right, and the system that they were working within is not nearly the same as your company likely. And so it's really good to think about what the systems were that they thrived in, right, in their previous roles versus what you need them to do. What I usually think about when I'm seeing a lot of experience is one of the big benefits of it is kind of it's almost knowing which screw to turn, right, and which screw not to turn. There's a story that I'm going to butcher that is, a homeowner needs something done on their house, and they hire a contractor to do the work. The contractor comes over, and within 30 minutes is out the door saying like, "Hey, yeah, it was easy. I fixed the job, right? Everything went well." And a week later, the homeowner gets a $500 bill, and the homeowner's like, "What the heck, right? You're only here for half an hour. How are you charging me this so much, right? This doesn't make any sense." And so the homeowner complains about the bill, and the contractor sends a revised invoice over, and there's 2 line items on it. One is turning the screw, which is $1, and then there's knowing which screw to turn, which is $499, right? And that is kind of the beauty of experience, right? It takes something that could be so difficult and time consuming and frustrating and costly, right? And makes it easy. And it's almost, magical to the point where you don't even have to think about it, right? If you get the right experience, that is. Versus if you don't, right? It almost takes a smooth sea and turns it into a rough sea, right? It's much more difficult to get where you're going. You're going in many more different directions, right? And can be a much more arduous process. And so that is kind of like in general how I think about experience and how beneficial it can be. But I guess it's not necessarily a good thing, right? As you were saying, Stein, with the wrong types of experience, it's not as beneficial as you might hope. Particularly, I guess, in the companies that we like to work with, where it goes wrong is if someone almost has too much experience and wants to go into more of the C-suite board level consultative approach where they don't really dig in and do much of the work. They like to show up for the meetings and have a bunch of really good ideas, but don't necessarily know or have the energy to really dig in and get them done or to see them to fruition. And especially with the companies that we typically work for, the marketing leader needs to be able to get their hands dirty, and they need to be able to dig in and really push for results.
Well, another challenge, Brian, is that if you have done something before, especially if you've done it a lot, it might not be that interesting for you anymore.
Mhm.
So being very experienced means that it might not be really something you want to do again. And finding that right balance by hiring someone who's going to be excited about the role, also because they can learn some things that are new, while also applying all their development experience to turn the right screw. That's kind of the right balance that you want to find.
Yeah, 90% effort from a less experienced person may be better than the 20% that you would get from the more experienced person as well. What do you think about industry or product type or service level expertise when you're going through the hiring process? Is that critical for you, or can that be forgiven?
It goes back to a little bit to if you have a really strong founder who has a ton of industry expertise, then maybe the CMO who we add doesn't need to necessarily bring that. It might actually be powerful to have the other side of that coin, right? Being able to translate some of these very industry-specific parts of the value proposition to other audiences, right? That maybe are important for the buyer's journey, but are not necessarily covered by what the current team knows a lot about and how to do. On the other hand, if you count on your CMO to drive the brand and the reputation and the position of your company from a content perspective, right? If that's one of their jobs, yeah, you do need someone who's either able to learn or is already experienced in kind of the job to be done, the use cases, the industry that you're servicing. Because we do know that being able to show up and to differentiate yourself as a company is all about content these days. And so the CMO is going to be your chief content officer, and then that is going to be more important that they bring that. But I also, and it goes back a little bit to the art and science kind of equation, right? How much does the CMO complement the other people that are already in the executive team, not just the founders, right? But maybe the chief sales officer or the R&D leader, if they are very strong with industry expertise and are able to help create content, and the CMO may not have to bring all that.
Yeah, perfect. I don't have much to add to that. I think sometimes people can get hung up on trying to find a leader that has the perfect amount of industry expertise, and that can, especially if you're not in a fully established industry, can be really difficult without just directly poaching them from a competitor, which is a pretty difficult task. I think what you said about complementing the founder and the executive team is perfect. I think it's really important to get someone who has tangential experience at the least, right? They need to know how to run for a marketing leader, right? Need to know how to run the go-to-market that you need run, right? And they need to have worked with a similar type of industry and a similar type of go-to-market, similar type of product, I think would be really helpful. But you definitely don't need direct industry experience necessarily.
Yeah, and I also think, this is maybe one of your first hires in the marketing team all up, right? And if it is, we talked about this in our last episode, the first hire usually has to be someone who's pretty good at content, right? And leadership, etc. So if this is still a really small team, then the CMO may have to be that person. But then if you already have some great team members, then the CMO being able to coach them and have them really be the subject matter expert is also totally fine.
Speaking of teams, I think one of the last big bucket that I like to think about when hiring a marketing leader, but really any hire, is culture fit. And there's a ton of literature and debate on this. But how important is culture fit to you when you're hiring? What do you look for to ensure a good culture fit as much as you can in the interview process? Talk us through that.
Yeah, this is, first of all, this one of your leadership team hires, right? So it's extremely, extremely important. Any hire, if it kind of doesn't fit the values of the company, it will really slow you down. If you have a strong, value system, if you have a really good culture, the team is going to be so small. You're hiring a lot of people to do. The first job they have to do is any job that's needed by the company, right? That's how small the team is. That's a great question. So I think if you can make that a big part of the early stage of an interview process to see, I like to let people do some homework before we do interviews, right? When people show an interest in a role, they write something short about, what they think the company's future could look like, what are the challenges that we face, what do they see online about the company. And when you let someone do that, even the way they communicate about doing some work through the hiring process and how they show up, is going to give you a good sense if there will be a culture fit. And you always want to enrich your culture with some new aspects, and diversity is, of course, fantastic. But only to the point where it would take maybe, it would hold back some of the things that you really like in the group that are not going to be supported by this new hire. What is your experience with this, Brian? If you come into a company also as a fractional CMO, of course, where if you felt there was a really good fit and where not, and kind of how did that have to do anything with the culture or the values?
In the hiring seat, I'm all about EOS, entrepreneurial operating system right now, and applying that within Kulungi. But when I'm looking at hiring, right, I think there's the right person in the right seat, right? And so you can, even if they have an impeccable resume, they check every single technical and performance related box, right? But just don't fit your core values, especially as you noted, Stein, right? Them being in a leadership position, it's a deal breaker, right? You can't hire someone who doesn't fit, because the impact that they'll have not only on the marketing team, to use a marketing leader as an example, but then throughout the leadership team and the rest of the company is just really hard to combat if they're a really poor culture fit. So I like to push those pretty hard and like to really dig into each core value if I can with that candidate to make sure that they are aligned with what we need for our culture. You know, I feel like as a fractional CMO, there has been some companies where I've come in and just fit with the culture, right? I align with their core values. I think about feedback the same way that they do. I think about performance the same way that they do. And that has been a really smooth transition. There have been other companies where I've come in as a fractional, right? And I guess transparently, right, had to kind of play the politics game to be able to navigate core values that maybe didn't fit as well as I wanted to. And performance aside, I think honestly the lack of a fit there made the contracts or the engagement shorter than they would have been, right? Because just naturally it becomes apparent that there isn't quite a fit within the leadership team, right? And they'll be quicker to move on into somebody that does fit, right? And it ends up being for the best for both parties. And you can you can always try and finesse your way around, right? And do the extra work to make it work. But you know, at the end of the day, it's hard to hide or to work around for a long period of time. And I feel like it naturally kind of sorts itself out. What have you seen as you've been a fractional?
I think the tendency for a marketing leader to have to take a lot of the load on their shoulders of things that the team and the company doesn't like about their image and about how they show up in the market and how their family members at home feel to come, means that you're in the leadership team, you're a really easy target for criticism, for challenges, etc. So someone who is a good fit is also comfortable being vulnerable. So I think this is not necessarily unique for a specific culture or a specific company, but I think it's a good cultural trait for a marketing leader to be comfortable to lead with the red, as we like to say, to be vulnerable, to be okay saying, hey, marketing, there will always be things that are not going to be perfect. So I think when I look for culture fit, I look for some of those traits that are more generic, I guess, but they're just very important for the role. Because like just the engineering leader may be able to hide a little more, the marketing leader cannot, right? It's a very public role. But maybe the only thing I want to add. I was wondering if we could switch a little bit in the conversation, Brian, to some more very sort of practical things. What I think is a very good practice when you hire a CMO is to write up what outcomes you actually expect. You know, actually build a couple of almost scorecards that say, hey, if I get the perfect CMO, these would be the four things that I would put on their dashboard or their OKRs. I've always thought of that as a very important part of doing an executive search in general, but for a CMO even more. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, it's a best practice, and it is better to do, honestly, as you're starting your search than, 6 months to a year into your new hire. I think especially, and what's interesting is that as a fractional CMO, I've seen one end of the conversation, and then also as the CEO working with other marketing leaders, I've seen the other seat, right? And so I've gotten to see both sides of the table, I guess. But it is really I think as an executive, right, it can be tempting to have one view going into a relationship and have those goalposts move as the relationship evolves. And so to your point, Stein, it is really important to think about what are the few key metrics that really this role, right, needs to move. Marketing is a performance-based role, and so you hire that to add pipeline, to add MQLs, right? And so knowing how much they need to move and what and how fast, I guess, is really critical in A, hiring the right person, but B, giving them the right budget and resources, and then C, holding them accountable to the end result. I think from my perspective, the key driver, right, is marketing qualified leads, especially to start. And that is, if I could only choose one, that would be it. A lot of founders can be tempted to say, hey, I want my marketer to drive revenue, right? And I get the sentiment, right? And it is good to have marketers fully aligned with sales on a target like that. But if we're just going to talk about marketing in a nutshell, they don't have the majority of cases, they do not have the span of control to really impact that number the way that they should if you're going to hang it around their neck. That's my biggest target. But they're, depending on the company that you're in, brand awareness metrics are really important, especially when you get into the larger stages, right? Conversion rates down the funnel, number of, marketing qualified leads within the ICP. And then of course, as the marketing team gets to be more mature, then I think you can start to hold the marketing leader to a sales qualified lead, or meetings that actually happened, or opportunities, or dollars in pipeline, right? But I do think that the MQL is a fantastic place to start if you want to just simplify and have them, especially as they get going, make sure that they move one number, right? That's the number they have to move.
Yeah, the marketing leaders fail in the first year. It's usually because at the end of the year, the founder or the CEO doesn't like the results. And I was asked, did you communicate those expectations in the first couple of months of the employment? And usually that wasn't really the case, right? And it's great to do it even before you start hiring.
Yeah, and marketing, as you were mentioning earlier, marketing is such a broad discipline that is, particularly as companies are starting up and even getting into the 20, 50 million plus range of ARR, marketing is so broad that it is almost impossible for all of it to be going 100% well, right? So you were talking about leading with the red earlier. If you're not leading with the red, something's wrong, honestly, because there will always be something to be improved, right? And I think that just being clear on, coming back to the metrics approach, right? Being clear on what the most important metrics are to move will help you to prioritize the right things and not get distracted by things that sure could be improved, right? And always things can. But if you spend your time chasing fires, you won't be able to move the numbers that really need to be moved. So as a founder, right, it's really good to be clear on what needs to be done, why you're hiring this role. But as the marketing leader, right, it's really good to set the right expectations and align with the founder on where do I need to take this company, right? And then let's get to the other stuff later. Let's get to that next year. Let's get to that next quarter, so that we can move the really important metrics. Do you want to go through the 10 CMO interview questions quickly? Or
listen, of everything we talk about, you can find in one of our blog articles. But there's a list that I published at some point that are the 10 kind of questions that I like to at least have in front of me when I interview a CMO candidate. And none of this is, of course, to be used verbally or exactly verbatim. But it is kind of a good set of questions that gives you a good perspective of a candidate from multiple sides. The first one, especially when you're hiring someone at the stage of the company where you're looking for growth in the funnel and in performance through a numbered lens, the first question can be, hey, what do you have on your marketing dashboard today? What are you tracking? What for you is a good, meaningful OKR? What do you look at weekly? What do you look at daily? What do you look at monthly? So that's my first question. The second question, completely different type of area, is how do you approach branding, both at the company level, but also at the product level, at the services level? It gives me a sense of how they think about a brand, right? Is it just a logo or a name, or is it something that's also includes things like values and culture? And neither of those answers is good or bad, but when I look for a certain candidate for a certain type of organization, that there is a certain part of the journey, I need to know if someone is really good at getting just the visual identity of a company to the right spot, or that they're really good at channeling the whole leadership team on kind of the values that maybe are supporting a certain brand ambition, right? And depending on where a company is, they may need more of one or the other, but getting a sense of how candidate sort of has either experienced those sides of kind of the journey of the company and branding or not is for me a really important question. Then the third question is, what are the biggest challenges for a CMO these days, right? I mean, I like to understand how many bruises a candidate has and what they've learned from. So this question gets me a little bit of that. But then also, are they ready for some of the challenges we may have in our company, where the whole executive team is looking for the CMO to be the knight in shiny armor who comes save the day, whether it's funnel performance or the fact that our website maybe is not great or the team is not performing. And asking a new candidate what they think are the biggest challenges for a CMO these days gives me a good sense of whether that will fit what we as a company. So those are the first three, Brian, and we have several more. So you want to maybe walk through a couple that you'd like to ask?
I love the marketing dashboard one just because it shows how strategic versus tactical that marketing leader is, and also just shows the rhythm that they'll be putting their team through, right, and how analytical their approach will be in terms of generating the right results and understanding the connection between the right leading indicators and the right results. So I'll start there, but I think a really good one is a question around their approach to marketing, to digital marketing, right? And how they think about things like inbound marketing versus outbound marketing, or even long-term growth versus short-term impact. Both of those things they're balanced questions, right? But I think it's very easy for certain marketers who have grown up in certain go-to-market motions, right, to be very, very used to a certain type, right? But that type of go-to-market motion may not fit with your company, right, and what you need. And there are marketing leaders who come from companies with tons of resources who can really focus on the long term, and they don't need to be profitable right now, right? But maybe your company needs that profitability up front, right? And it's really good to align with them on that and really to understand where they will impact and how they think about that, right? You could absolutely bring in a really qualified marketing leader who is just focused on, I don't care about profitability within the next 6 to 12 months because I'm building a brand, right? And I want organic scalability, which isn't technically the wrong answer, but it might be wrong for your company, right? So I really think that short-term versus long-term view and prioritization is really important. And then, of course, inbound versus outbound, right? Depending on your average contract value, depending on your go-to-market motion, right? Having a balance of both can be really important, and knowing the relationship between the two, how the two different go-to-market strategies feed off of each other and make the whole greater than the sum of their parts is really important. That's my favorite, I think. But I also like just asking them to almost pretend like they're the marketing leader within the room, right? And really testing how much research they've done on the company and just asking them, if you were the leader right now, what strategies and tactics would you put in place? What are we doing wrong, right? Where can we improve? And forcing them to get a little bit more tactical with their answers and be more specific, because it's easy especially for people of that caliber to sound really good in theory, right? And in generalizations. But when you start to really nail them down on specifics, then I think it becomes a much more real conversation. It also will show you how well they deal with conflict and how well they'll deal with disagreements and how well they could be more of a culture fit in your team. So I'm a big fan of that question as well.
We'll share the list. I think there's 10 core questions that we've 8 optional ones. There's a whole bunch of, another article as well. We have 2 blogs, I think. Brian, the one with the 10 questions, and then one it's called How to Hire a CMO.
Really good resources for you if and when you are hiring a marketing leader. I think, picking and choosing the right combination of questions as you're taking them through. Kalungi hires at the end of our engagements. More often than not, we will hire our replacements, right, in terms of marketing leaders. And so we do this all the time. And we use these questions, right, when we're hiring that marketing leader. And it's worked really well for us. So hopefully it works well for you. Do you want to touch on just in general, right, any considerations about compensation before we wrap this topic?
If you're in an early stage company, you have to be okay getting compensated partly by what you're going to learn. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to try new things, to be the owner of a problem, and have a lot of empowerment and freedom to do things your way. In exchange for it, you probably may not get paid the same. I think we get in a company that's much more mature. I think if a CMO is able to get away with a comp package that's a little too rich for the blood of a company, they'll just be meeting that problem down the road, like a year and a half in. It's one of the reasons I think that the more experienced CMOs sometimes not succeed with earlier stage companies, because the comp level just becomes unbearable of the company. Then the expectations of the CMO from the board and the founder are going to be a little bit unrealistic, and that's just not going to end well. So just if you want to work in a smaller, earlier stage company, you got to be careful. You got to be okay with maybe making a little less than a Series C or a larger, more profitable later stage company. And then there's the whole, how much is base salary and benefits versus upside in the form of bonus, and then maybe participation in the form of equity. I think it's absolutely appropriate for early stage companies to expect one of their executive team members to be willing to be paid in equity for a good chunk of their upside. I don't think that can replace having also a good salary for the work you do. You need to be able to do the work full time and be focused on it and not have to do other things on the side because you have to complement your income. So I think that's an important component, to have a really decent salary that is good for you to live on, to take care of your family, and then have a lot of other maybe upside in the form of real equity that requires you to be part of the team for a longer time. There's a vesting schedule that is really meaningful for you, that has real interesting upsides. And then a bonus if the sales team is on kind of sales commission, and there's a way for you to also in the marketing team get a little more of an immediate reward for performance. I think that's fine, but you have to be careful. You have to be able to have KPIs that are really easy to measure, that are not easy to game. So having a bonus in a marketing team is usually a little less interesting for me. The problem with bonuses, 10, 15, 20% bonuses, is that if you don't have real sales targets that you can target to, like in the sales team, then you end up tying into things that are going to be arbitrary, right? MQLs or other forms of earlier stage KPIs that are not necessarily paying for themselves. But the company is not getting any money if you get an MQL, right? Not a customer yet. So it's hard to pay those bonuses for the company out of actual money made extra. And then it's easier to game. And then when you have, for example, OKRs, which I'm a huge fan of, the tendency will be that to tie the OKRs to compensation, to the bonus. And then that defies the purpose of OKRs having to be really stretched. And so anyway, so I'm a fan of a good salary, but a very nice chunk of equity that is really aligned with the company's long-term success for a marketing leader. I'm a fan of bonuses. Then one last thing, it is very common these days, if you're an executive, to negotiate some form of parachute clause. If you are giving up a very specific, job where you have maybe secure employment, etc., requiring a startup where you go to say, hey, if it doesn't work out and it's not for cause, but for something maybe we could have done a better job, qualifying you as a candidate, etc., then having your equity vest, or maybe getting some form of payout. If the relationship ends early, getting a couple of months of salary so that you're able to find something new is very appropriate for an executive. Maybe when you're more junior, hire, it's totally fine to get a couple of weeks of severance. But if you're an executive, you give up a lot of maybe other opportunities if you commit to a startup. You want to be able to have your executive be all in, to not again have to do things on the side. So in that sense, a good parachute clause that has maybe 2, 3, 4 months of required pay if it doesn't work out, and maybe the vesting of some of the equity is, I think, appropriate for an executive to be all in into this new role.
You hit all the high notes. I think just more, the only thing else that I'll add is more in general, right? As you were talking, this goes back to experience as well, right? And even having that candidate who has taken a similar company in a similar industry through the exact same path that you're looking to go through, right, is a fantastic thing to look for. But in terms of compensation, that they may very well be outside the range that you're willing to pay for, right? And if you, as a founder or an executive, decide to stretch yourself and your company to go get them, right, as you were saying, Stein, the expectations may rise to the point where it's not even reasonable, regardless of how talented they are, right? And just so think through that possibility of having somebody on your team that is that much of a drain on resources. It just may get to a point where, regardless of how good they do, the company just can't pay for them at that point, right? And so you have to weigh that, the risk of hiring somebody with so much experience and that is so burdensome financially on the company, right, with the rewards that they can actually deliver. I think that's just it can be so tempting to find that perfect candidate and really want to splurge on them because of all the possibilities, but you just have to be realistic with what you can afford. Okay, well, I think that about wraps it up. We hope this was helpful. I think, in general, there's so many, when you're hiring a CMO in particular, but an executive, there's so many different variables to consider. So it is really important, right, to think about the budget that you have for the candidate, the amount of experience that you need, but then also, right, how they're going to fit with your culture and how really what the needle is that you need them to move, right? So do some of that homework yourselves before you start interviewing candidates, and I think you'll end up in a much happier place, right, where you'll find the right person for the right seat that can really move the company forward. So thanks so much for your time, Stein, and your insights as always.
Thank you.
Thank you to Adriana Valerio for producing this episode and the Kalungi team for helping us make this whole thing work. And of course, you for choosing to spend your time with us. As a reminder, all the links we mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. And if you want to submit or vote on a question you'd like us to answer, you can do that at kalungi.com/podcast. Every time we record, we take one of the top 3 topics and jam on it. Thanks again.